WWDC Keynote Wrap-Up, Part 1. This is MacVoices. MacVoices is supported by the Wondery Business Movers podcast, The Enlightenment of Steve Jobs, in Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and in the Wondery app. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this is MacVoices Live. We do this every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We are broadcasting live on YouTube at youtube.com/MacVoicesTV. We'd love to have you join us to throw comments, questions, thoughts, opinions at us. We'll try to respond and hopefully give you some intelligent responses. As is, should be no surprise, this will be our WWDC wrap-up show. We are about, let's see, what is it? About a day and a half after the keynote. And honestly, I kind of like this. We, or at least I had entertained the idea of trying to do something the evening after, and there's just so much stuff that happens, and also stuff that comes out after the keynote that is equally interesting and important. So hopefully we can bring a little perspective to all the announcements. So let's just get to it. I'm going to go around the room, introduce the folks, and then we'll take off. And I'm going to go from the bottom up, at least on my screen as of right now. So that means I get to welcome for the first time on MacVoices Live, Patrice Brend'amour. Patrice, hi. Welcome. Good to have you.
Well, yeah, glad I could be here. I mean, it's like 2 a.m.-ish, so
I was say,
there's that.
Yeah, I really appreciate the extra effort there, Patrice. Yeah.
No worries. Yeah. It's worth it. So I'm happy to see all of you.
There's time yet.
Yeah.
Have you seen the show, Patrice?
The evening is young.
I have, yeah. So
okay. All right. Next up, Brittany Smith is here. Brittany, welcome. Good to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're in a new location tonight again. You're just bouncing all over the place.
Yeah, I went a place so that I could watch Dub Dub with someone else, like a human being.
I see. Okay, got it. Beside her is Mr. Jeff Gamet. Jeff, thanks for being here.
Thanks for letting me come back yet again. I never know. Each week when I join, I'm just waiting to see if I get let in, and I did. So thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. The click slipped.
So I can appreciate that. Yeah, it happens.
Guy Serle is here as well. This time in a much more sedate T-shirt than the last time.
Yeah. It's not orange and doesn't glow in the dark and any of those things. I figured I was on probation, so I better dress down.
Okay. Well, not for probation for me, but I can't speak for the FBI. So,
well, unfortunately, they can't speak for themselves either.
No boy.
Yeah,
I'm getting away from that quick.
In his grave.
Yeah, I'm getting away from that quick.
I hope so.
Jim Ray is here. Jim, good to have you.
Hey, WWDC.
Yeah, you look like you're there in spirit, even if it's really not there. I like that. Nice background.
I took this picture 2 years ago. So that is the convention center.
Yep, you've been waiting all this time to use it, right?
He's a hot dog vendor.
I've used it a few other times.
Mr. Frank Petrie is here. I don't know. Are you peddling? Mr. Yeah. Are you peddling hot dogs, Frank, or?
There was some, I got a little side hustle.
Okay. Works for me.
With my New York accent or New Jersey accent, I have to have a cart, all that stuff and sell cigarettes.
Certainly it's south of Boston.
Thank you.
Jay Miller, I'd ask you about your side hustle, but I'm afraid of what the answer would be.
Which one? I mean, I do so many things, and I'm just happy to be here with all the little who's on WWDC.
All the who's in Whoville.
Man. Kelly Guimont is here. Kelly, welcome. Good to have you.
It's nice to be here. And I'm just going to point out that so far I have not been the troublemaker in any of this.
What time is it?
The night is young.
She did say so far.
I said so far.
Yeah, definitely.
I promise nothing.
Last but absolutely not least, Mr. David Ginsburg. David, good to have you. Welcome.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me as always. This is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. It is going to be fun. So we have a 2-hour keynote to talk about in a show that theoretically is an hour, usually goes closer to an hour and a half.
3, 4.
Yeah, we can't cover everything. So what I've asked the group to do is to pick out 1 or 2 of the things that they felt were most important from or interesting or exciting from their perspective. Because that way we have such a mix of people here and backgrounds and specializations that I thought we would get a nice round mix. But I don't want to waste a lot of time on this, but I do want to ask how everybody thought this keynote went. I mean, because this is another recorded one, all pre-prepared. And it surprised everybody that at least where I was, it surprised them that it went a full 2 hours as opposed to the 60-minute runs that we've had before. Yeah. Anybody have strong feelings about how it went, good, bad, or indifferent?
I thought it was just sort of there, and I sort of felt like it could have been a 1-hour event, but they sort of stretched it. I sort of get the feeling because, was it 2 or 3 nights before it was put out that, they were going to have the spatial audio event or something, and that never happened. And I can't help but feeling that something behind the scenes didn't pan out.
Okay. Anybody else? Strong feelings, good, bad, or indifferent?
I didn't think they could have made it shorter. It was packed. It wasn't full of blockbusters. There was no blockbuster like the last 2 years. This was kind of a consolidation year. But man, there was a lot of little stuff that it was just like bam, bam, bam. I still don't feel like I really, I'm still studying and like, oh, look at that little thing. Oh, look at that little thing. On the other hand, I don't know how many of you watched the State of the Union. I thought that was really disappointing. Usually for developers, that's where the real meat was. It was only 73 minutes.
Yeah.
And, all of a sudden it was over and I'm like, what? That's it.
I think
talk about any.
Yeah, I think both of them were really oddly paced. Like the beginning of the keynote was kind of slow, and then it picked up, and then it was like, oh, and what we talked about before, it is also on this platform. The State of the Union, there were some really good bits and some really interesting bits, but as you said, it was way too short. There was, looking at all the sessions, there's so much stuff to talk about. And they mentioned nothing in the State of the Union. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
I think they should have released some of the videos yesterday. I noticed James Dempsey said that on Twitter, and I agreed with that. It's like got to the end of the State of the Union, and I'm like, okay, let's start seeing some of those sessions. What's new in Swift? What's new in Swift UI? And for some reason we have to wait till 10 a.m. Pacific time to see more. I mean, if it was a person that together, but
I feel like partly it's because the morning event has evolved into its own thing, and it's not what it used to be, because it used to be sort of like semi-public. Like if you were interested in what the betas were going to look like, you could check it out. There were you had to go to some effort, not extraordinary lengths, but you had to go to some effort in order to get to watch the WW keynote in the morning. And the developer State of the Union was never available to anybody who didn't have a developer counter ticket. Like whatever you had to do to get access to videos before was the only way that you got to watch the State of the Union. And so I feel like over time, the keynote has become a more public event, because I guarantee you, I didn't watch any of them this morning, but I guarantee you every single morning chat show had a bit on Apple unveiled what's coming to macOS and iOS yesterday. And, in regular mainstream news stuff, and we didn't used to have that. So I think part of it is because that particular block of data has become kind of a one shot for people. Like there's twice a year that we can sort of reliably get a good look at what Apple's up to. And it's the WW keynote on Monday morning, and it's whatever they tell us in the iPhone event about what the next ones are going to do. And those are like the two reliable sources of information. There's other stuff. They have hardware events sometimes. They have press releases sometimes, you know, depending on what, you know, what it is that changed, if they've upgraded something. But those are the two that we can be reliable about. The WW keynote is going to tell us about what's coming in the new operating system software. And then this fall, just before that's actually released, we will get the hardware event that talks about the iOS stuff that's going to run all that. So it feels like that event has sort of become a very different thing from the rest of WW. So I feel like that's why it seemed like it took so long to get to the parts that developers were going to be interested in. Like, here's what Swift UI is doing, and here's some of the APIs that you're going to be able to work with. And there was a little bit of that before we got to like the second hour, but most of the stuff that sort of felt like it was for developers was more at the end, because they were showing off end user features and what end users were going to do and what the end user experience was going to look like, and not talking about how anybody was going to be able to code that stuff to get there.
No, I'm not complaining about the amount of developer content in the keynote. I thought it was fine. And, you know, like you say, definitely been something couched for a general audience for years now, even when it was an in-person event. But usually the State of the Union would be like 2.5 hours and would be just packed, you know, with technical stuff. And A, it was really short, and B, it like, you know, I mean, usually that was a really good preview of here's what we're going to show you this week. And they just didn't, you know?
Usually it was, the keynote was, I mean, one, the public facing stuff, but also a little bit of, okay, here's the big picture stuff. And then in the State of the Union, they would go into the details for developers and say, okay, like, remember you heard about, I don't know, the new Mac OS? Here are 15 APIs for that. And we have sessions for it, and so on. Like, that was like 2.5 hours basically giving you pointers, what would be interesting, what's happening, some details about stuff that they haven't talked about. And that's missing completely. It was missing from the main keynote, and it was missing from the State of the Union.
Well, that's concerning.
Well, I don't know, Jeff, if it's concerning, because let's face it, this was a different event. And about what I mean by that is the online nature of it. That the previous keynotes were obviously streamed, but there was a live audience there of developers, no question about it. And now, sure, there's that live audience of developers, hopefully, that are watching the keynote. But there's a lot, to Kelly's point, there's a lot more public end user interest in this one. And so I don't know if that, you know, had anything to do with it. I don't know. I have to wonder if, you know, the idea that, okay, they've published the WWDC app and all those things, if a lot of the schedules were there and they didn't feel the need to, you know, do it as a welcome to the conference. But so it doesn't concern me. It just, I think we have to look at, you know, exactly how it was delivered. And obviously the pandemic is why it was delivered that way.
All right, so let me clarify my concern. First, the keynote I thought was fine, and the keynote, it's no secret for the past several years has been an event for the media and consumers. And then you have the State of the Union after that, which is the keynote for developers. And the evolution of the way the main keynote has progressed over the years makes sense, because the way Apple has approached conferences over the past several years, well, I mean, like when they left Macworld Expo, that changed fundamentally how Apple approaches conferences. So, of course, this keynote is going to be different, but I expect the State of the Union keynote to be long and just packed, really dense with information. So the part that concerns me is, because I haven't had a chance to watch that yet, is hearing people say, wow, that was short and it was light on information. And if that is true, well, I mean, does that mean that there's a lot under the hood that Apple just doesn't have ready to even talk about with developers?
To me, it just felt like the State of the Union, whoever put it together, it felt like an afterthought. It felt like, oh yeah, shit, we need a State of the Union. It looks like there's lots of great talks. I've already, like, my eyes are bleeding. I've been watching talks several hours today, and I watched. But a lot of stuff that in a normal year, including last year, which was a pandemic year, would have been mentioned in the State of the Union. Like Patrice said, usually the State of the Union is a guide of, here's what you're going to see this week. Do that. They just had, I think, maybe 5 things. I mean, they started off with Xcode Cloud, which I think is not something that's going to affect too many developers. And then, it felt more like an ad for certain things, like this whole thing about, AR scanning. Again, how many developers, that's not a mainstream thing that, it felt almost more like that wasn't, was towards the press or something of, bragging about this whizzy technology, but not telling us about what we're going to tell you about apps. Now, I think, later I'll tell you that, I think there's a ton of material they're presenting us with this week, but it was just weird how the State of the Union just felt like, it just, to me, it felt like, a week ago, somebody's like, we haven't done a State of the Union yet. So, let's throw something together. That's what it felt like to me.
There was a lot of topics today, so that's really the thing too, is a lot of heavy topics. The Xcode Cloud and what's new in Swift, and a lot of the other topics that are now in the day 2 highlights. That in itself brought a lot of the information away from the State of the Union, in my opinion.
This edition of MacVoices is supported by the Wondery Business Movers podcast. From the makers of the hit series Business Wars comes the new season of Business Movers, a weekly podcast that explores the legendary and controversial career of Steve Jobs. You know the Steve Jobs story, or do you? His road to Silicon Valley success was a rocky one, filled with failure and burned bridges. You know that Steve led Apple, was ousted, started Next, bought Pixar, and then returned to Apple. But do you know the details? Because the details are everything when it comes to knowing how Steve became who he was and who we remember him to be. On the new season of Business Movers, learn how Jobs took Apple from near disaster to total triumph. This is a story that you don't want to miss, whether you appreciate or understand his contributions to the modern world or not. Steve is a business legend, and this is his story. Listen to Business Movers, The Enlightenment of Steve Jobs, on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon Music, or you can listen 1 week early and ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. Wondery. Feel the story. Thanks to Wondery for their support of MacVoices. I want to give Jay the last word on this, and then we'll move on.
That's
Jay,
always dangerous.
Yeah, well,
I'll say this: we have on this panel a developer in the Apple ecosystem and then a developer that uses the Apple ecosystem, and I think that that's wonderful because that gives you 2 developer perspectives of the outside looking in and the inside looking in. For me, every year, I mean, obviously new operating systems, woo, new features, woo, all this fun stuff that no one that cares will, other than the people here and the people that are listening to us, are going to even see until September. But for me, WWDC is always the day where I question, is this the year when I try to build my rinky-dink Hello World iOS app, and if I want to do it? And after looking at all the features that were announced, looking at all the things that were announced, looking at the comments that Apple made towards, hey, we gave out $1 billion, hey, we care so much about developers. They are the cornerstone of what we do. And then listening to the and reading the State of the Union recaps, I was like, this year there was no desire to even think about developing in the ecosystem. And I don't know why. I don't have that answer, but 2 years ago, I was watching all of the events. I was, trying to get as much of it that I could because I was like, this is the year. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And then the panda happened. And then I was like, whatever. And then this year I was like, this is going to be the year. And then it came back and I was like, I wonder what's happening over in JavaScript land somewhere. I wonder what's happening in React world. And like, I never want to get to that point. So not to say that it wasn't a good event, but I feel like previous events left a lot of new developers encouraged to get into the Apple ecosystem and to get into developing for it. I don't know if that happened this year.
Okay, that's interesting perspective. So let's not get hung up on that though, because obviously different perspectives and different ideas. But let's start getting into some of what was announced and what got you excited. Brittany, I haven't heard from you yet, so I'm going to start with you. What one or two things caught your imagination?
Well, for anyone who's ever met me, there are changes to shortcuts, and I'm excited to try those. We've talked about shortcuts on the Mac before on here. I can talk. And I'd said it's going to be a while before it would integrate all the way because you need the buy-in from developers. And that is what we have. There's some features on shortcuts on the Mac that you can't use on iOS and vice versa because the apps haven't been updated for the Mac yet to use those intents. That they're so reliant on for the third-party integration on iOS. But the developers who are really on top of stuff are going to do something about it sooner, whereas other ones will take a while. The ones who probably took a while on iOS, right? And so that's exciting, but also I can't wait till it's there for reals. But I like there's a future of automation that's going to be more integrated, and that's really cool. And then there's new things to attention and how we interact with our devices. And so I've been investigating real hard the changes to notifications and do not disturb that they talked about.
I've been dying to get your thoughts on focus. What do you think? How do you feel about focus?
After digging in, what it is it's an adaptation to do not disturb. I thought it was going to be an adaptation to screen time, but it's really just different types of do not disturb mode. I have some more digging to do, but yeah, those are my initial. That's what it really is.
It's really that focus that do not disturb is now one mode in focus.
Right.
Just another focus.
Yeah.
Item. I don't know what to call them.
Yeah. Do not disturb is one of the focuses, but they took like do not disturb and said, you know what? What if do not disturb, but more of them?
Okay.
I'm really surprised about shortcuts. I think they went farther than I would have expected on a Mac. The whole import of Automator.
Yeah.
That's surprising.
Yeah, who had Automator mentioned on their checklist?
Nobody.
And it supports Apple scripts and shell scripts.
Yeah.
So they're not taking anything away
yet.
Yes, they are. Just not yet.
I don't think so. No, I disagree.
They said
Automator's going to go.
Yeah.
Automator.
Well, maybe
its functionality. Its functionality will be turned into whatever's required for shortcuts.
Yeah, and that's fine because then there'll only be one, and you'll be able to do the things, and it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think AppleScript. AppleScript has been on death row for a while now, and I think what's going to happen ultimately is that Automator, of course, is going to disappear. AppleScript will disappear. We'll have shortcuts and JavaScript.
I completely disagree. I think this is. I
would love for you to be right. I mean, seriously.
I think this is insurance that AppleScript is say.
I would love for you to be right.
No, for one, there's no reason for them to take it out at this point. Why?
Distractions.
They
I
said
think
they
it'll
were.
outlast Automator.
Yep.
I you know,
Well,
there's-
AppleScript isn't cross-platform, meaning you can't run AppleScript on an iPhone or an iPad,
Right,
but you can
right.
run JavaScript on an iPhone and an
Mhm.
iPad and a Mac.
Yeah, and
That's got nothing to do with
enable-
nothing. The whole thing is that Apple Events and AppleScript is this inter-process communication thing, and there's going to be apps that just never they aren't going to adopt intents and whatnot, and B, Apple Events and AppleScript, it's a richer thing. So, and it's programmable. You can go in. I saw a thing. Somebody was like, "Oh, can you go into shortcuts and can you edit and cut and paste and copy something out from one script and put it in another one?" Nope, you can't do that. So, I think there's still going to be, and the great thing is, well, you can develop an automation with AppleScript, and now you can just call it from a shortcut. So
But
they work
several years ago,
together.
They made it so that instead of the AppleScript app or whatever you want to call it, it was the scripts, and it started incorporating JavaScript. So it could be consumed either way. I still think it'll be around for a little bit longer than Automator.
Mhm.
Still have
And
time.
Apple Events is on the way out as well.
I disagree.
It doesn't even exist on iOS, and like that's the direction everything's going.
I knew this.
disagree.
I knew this topic would generate a bit of conversation because it seems like a number of the podcasts, a number of the articles I've listened to from every direction, they said this is the future of automation on the Mac, and
Craig was very clear about that.
Yeah, and
because
so
he said that explicitly.
Yes,
in those words.
Yeah, in those words.
Exactly. So the fact that they have a Rosetta-like in function, not in name, but they'll be able to pull things from AppleScript and Automator into shortcuts. But I don't know. I personally feel like this is a good thing because AppleScript is intimidating. Automator is not quite as intimidating, but also doesn't seem to be as powerful. Shortcut seems to combine the best of both worlds, at least at the level I work at.
And I'll tell you what they're doing that's great that we didn't think would happen a couple of years ago, which is they're not losing functionality. So even if it's not called Apple Events, even if it's not the same in its base level code, the functionality will continue to exist based on what it looks like right now. They're not going to take away our toys. They're just going to have them made out of a different material.
Shortcuts on iOS can out of the box do more things than Automator ever did.
Absolutely.
It hasn't changed in, I don't know, 10 years probably.
Yeah. If they're taking it away in order to give me something that does all the stuff that I could do already and also a bunch of other stuff, I'm not mad about it. But yeah, that's what's happening. That's the change is that we had AppleScript for a long time. And then in the name of helping more people use it, I guess, we got Automator, and I had a nifty little robot friend, and now he's leaving too. But the upside is that if I spend a bunch of time building something to automate a basic thing on my computer, it will probably also work on my phone, and that's great, or on my new iPad. And that's a fair trade. I wondered before when we were here, what Apple was going to kill next, and now I know what it is. It's Automator is basically going away.
Well, that's not necessarily the thing that's dying next. It's a multi-year transition.
I know. Well, it's the next thing they've killed. They've said multi-year transition, so we know its days are numbered. We have an idea how high that number is, but the days are numbered. And good, honestly, good, because it's better to take it out back in Old Yeller than it is to let it continue to sit there and take up space on your system and not be a thing that anybody can do anything with. Because anybody who's having their first experience with Automator right now is not happy with it, particularly if they're coming to it as a shortcuts user who is reasonably competent in shortcuts and is like, oh, I've discovered there's this thing that will do this on my Mac for me too.
The question that I have,
better for everybody. I'm for it.
Oh, okay.
I think that the addition of shortcuts on the Mac is going to increase the use of AppleScript and Apple Events. It's not going to go down. It's going to be, that stuff's going to be used more.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to introduce it to people that never would have used it before. And they're going to, people are going to go in and say, oh, they're going to start doing shortcuts, and then they're going to say, oh, I want to do this thing. And, oh, the only way I can do it is in AppleScript. Well, what's that? And you can add that to your shortcut. So advanced people are going to, I think it's going to do, and there's no reason for Apple to remove it. It's not going to save anything. Automator, maybe. That's probably a support thing. But Apple Events, they're built into the system at a low level. I don't think they're going to remove it. I don't think there's a reason to. And I think those things are going to get more use. The great thing about shortcuts is it's attracting a lot of attention to automation, which is something that, like 5 years ago, we're like, automation is like, nobody's doing it. It's a dying thing. And I will say too that I think it looks like the way they did it is great. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be a attribute of the workflow team. I mean, that's who did this, right?
Absolutely.
First, these people invented, workflow, and then they came, got hired by Apple, and apparently have maintained, that it's still that team. I'm sure there's more people, but it seems to still be being run by the people that did workflow, and they seem to be directing it. And when shortcuts came out, everyone was like, wow, this is great. Everybody thought Apple bought workflow to kill it, and instead, and then, then they came up with a big expansion of shortcuts, and everybody was like, wow, this is great. And now this same team, has brought it to the Mac, and guess what? Look, they did it in a great way that builds on what was already on in the Mac, and rather than competing with it, they subsumed it. And, it looks like win-win to me, and chapeau to these guys. Whatever Apple's paying them, they should have a raise.
Jim, I don't think anybody's going to touch your Apple scripting. So but that's also the problem, is that no one's touched it.
The team is not even there.
Yeah, it hasn't been
the team that wrote
it's not been modified.
Yeah, there's one guy.
The problem with Automator and why it's definitely disappearing even sooner is the problem with most of the Apple technology from a developer perspective, and that's a lack of documentation. The thing that made shortcuts as good, in my opinion, as it was that, one, the stuff that was documented right there in front of you. So you could just you could press and hold and it told you what it did. But more than that, I didn't feel like I had to go check out documentation that just doesn't exist. Or if it does exist, it's because the forums say, hey, this is broken. Does anybody have a solution? No, I have the same problem. No, me too. I have the same problem too. I wonder when this is going to be fixed. Oh, it was working in the last update, but now it's broke again. That's the level of documentation that happens with a lot of the quote unquote legacy systems that Apple has brought along with it. Shortcuts is new. There's a thriving community of smarter people than I. Shout out to the Christopher Lawleys and the Brittany Smiths and the Matt Casanellis that are putting out content left and right on this stuff, because honestly, I don't trust Apple to do it. And they've already said Ruby and Python are going to go away natively on the system. You'll have to install it, which is both good and bad, but they want to steer people in the one direction. And honestly, part of that could mean that they go out in Old Yeller, as Kelly has aptly put it, Apple Events and AppleScript and all of these things. But more than likely, they're just going to let it die on the vine and let people forget about it, because eventually we will forget about it. Except
you can do the same thing with the pretty little icon instead of the AppleScript. You're going to do it that way.
Guy, you're awfully quiet, and I know you have to have some
Don't
thoughts on
encourage
this.
him, Chuck.
Not so much on shortcuts and Automator, but on some of the other things. I'm letting the people much more attuned to it than I have their say.
Guys already forgotten about it.
About what?
What was that?
I don't. Thanks, David. Well, David, get it. Yeah, you get in here too, because we look to you for the enterprise perspective on this. Is there an enterprise perspective on this?
I think there could be. I think shortcuts is really going to expand upon things in enterprise, probably more so than ever. Automator and AppleScript, again, I work in a Windows shop, so obviously I can't really say either way where that would fit into these things, but as companies expand and use Macs in their environments, I think it's going to be something that is going to excel things in the enterprise world, because it'll allow them to really get creative and get things to work more efficiently. With the advent of agile concepts in a lot of the enterprise these days, that's a thing that people really want to do with having these types of scripting languages, and shortcuts is going to be no different, especially on the Mac.
And the thing that's going to be great about that is being able to build a little utility to help people do the thing,
right.
Whatever it is. You can deploy it at scale, and it's like you can just share it with anybody that wants it. If you have trouble doing this thing or loading this tool, or whatever fiddly setup it is that you have that can be automated. If you do that within shortcuts, it's going to play by every single rule that Apple has. And that's going to be the magic, because developing a custom app for something that you need to do in-house is hard. And part of the reason it's hard is because of all the rules you have to follow and all of the parameters you bump up against that you don't realize are there unless you do this all the time. So if you're trying to one-off something for somebody, or trying to make a little lightweight thing that this team can all use to do that thing better, then it's going to be a lot easier to make sure that you are operating within those parameters if you're using a tool that Apple gave you that's going to be able to make that happen. So I'm actually really looking forward to that.
It will probably come as no surprise to you that this discussion went on for quite some time, given the passion of our panel about the announcements at Apple's WWDC keynote, as well as the number of announcements at the keynote. So this session is going to be broken up into a number of different parts to make it a little easier for you all to dig into. Next time, we continue with a couple more picks from a couple of the panelists. A little farther down the road, we go off topic, we come back on, we go back off, we come back on. In other words, a normal MacVoices Live panel discussion. Until the next time, and as always, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.